Thank you. Next up, we have Bob Sampson, who is a member of the Rock Spring Ground Squirrels Club and is also the current historian for VBBA. So Bob, you are up and ready to go.
Hey, let me see if I can you make me so I can share?
I gave you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay, let me see if I can find where the thing's at. Okay, well, it's not allowing me to do anything. Let me keep looking around here. I may just get up. Oh, here we go, here we go, here we go. Okay, while I'm setting this up, I have to admit I'm a little bit intimidated here because I'm in the presence of Bruce Allardyce and my other good friend Jim Toole, both of whom have, here we go, both of whom have written excellent books on baseball, and both of whom have been very great help to me over the years. Bruce with the Proto Ball and many kindnesses, and Jim is one of my mentors in the vintage game. And if we can get the old technology to cooperate here, we will start momentarily. I used to have this problem with some of my classes when I was teaching last couple semesters. Oh, there we are. So in the Garden of Eden, competition, the Serpents being competition, conflict, and collapse in early Illinois baseball between 1865 and 1870. And the Serpents are the discordant elements, competition, conflict, and collapse. And the Garden simply is the idealized version of baseball in the 1860s, or at least as it was imagined and promoted by people like Henry Chadwick, and certainly in Illinois as these clubs were formed, and almost without exception, they would adopt the rules and the bylaws and everything whole hog from Chadwick's writings. So the background on this, hopefully we can get this to move. This is what you're seeing there is portion of a map. Now that map was, that picture of the map was taken around 2017. I think that's 16, whenever the last conference was in Chicago area. If I were to show you that map today, those little pins would cover a lot more territory, and each of those pins represents a community that has a team. And you'll notice, if you are familiar with Illinois, that the growth of baseball, surprise, surprise, matches the railroads and the rivers. It moves along. There are also some blanks, some places that don't have, especially in Western Illinois, and most particularly in Southeastern Illinois, which you really can't see here, for which there are no recorded teams. Does that mean there were no teams? No, it just means that all of the evidence has disappeared. So there probably were some teams there, but we have lost them. In my research, which took about 10 years, I went through every extant newspaper in Illinois. And then at the end, I supplemented that with the fine Protoball site. So between my research and Protoball, there's about a little over 1,000 teams that were playing in Illinois between 1865 and 70. Interestingly enough, can you hear me? Yeah, everybody's still okay. Interestingly enough, around 1868, there's a drop off in interest. Now, what I'm talking about, and when I refer to clubs here, are adult male clubs. And there was significant newspaper interest, more as a social phenomena than as an athletic event. They really didn't know how to cover a ball game because outside of the East Coast, nobody was really covering or writing game stories on these little weeklies or what have you. The game that came to Illinois and spread literally like wildfire from 1865 to 1868 was the idealized game whose goals were exercise, fellowship, and as such, it became a social phenomenon, something that newspapers gloried in. You would have huge stories about these games. Most of the stories did not really give you a clear idea of what happened in the games, but we talked about how many ladies showed up, how the one club met the other club at the railroad depot and they escorted them to the field and they had a big banquet afterwards and they all got along wonderfully on the field and they looked great in their uniforms and the ladies liked the uniforms. All sorts of social stuff rather than that. Well, that's going to start to change as the game among these adult male clubs starts to play out. And we're going to get the intrusion of community pride and competition. For one thing, all these little towns, and there are, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, so I'm just going to stop at the edge. There are literally teams and places you cannot find on the map today. I had to go and do all sorts of extra research. Where the heck is, there was a team called the Africans, for example. Oh, great. There's a black team maybe in southeastern Illinois, except there are no blacks in southeastern Illinois at this time. Well, it turns out in Clark County, there's a place called African Township, and that's a whole story. So that was the Africans from African Township, Clark County, Illinois. But all of these towns, or many of them, are in competition. You know, there's this economic boom after the Civil War. One of the things that's going on in Illinois is they're building railroads as fast as they can get those iron rails and those wooden ties on the ground. And when it ends up, Illinois is going to have the most railroad tracks of any state in the Union. By the end of the 19th century, a place like Texas, you'd think Texas would have more railroads. No. Illinois had thousands of miles of railroad track because they were building railroads everywhere they could. These little towns and communities and townships, they're in competition for those railroads. And one of the ways you want to make yourself attractive is, you know, you have a thriving commercial center. You're also competing commercially, you know, rivals in your immediate area. Well, you know, LaSalle is really a nicer town than Ottawa. You know, you ought to bring your business to Ottawa, or you need to bring your business to Rock Island. Forget those idiots over in Moline, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of competition among these communities already. And what I will argue is that baseball becomes yet another club to hopefully pound on each other with or show that they're better. In fact, even when they're creating baseball clubs, or these newspapers are urging people to create baseball clubs, they'll invoke this. For instance, a little place called Princeton, southwest of Ottawa, in describing the need for some people in town to create a baseball club. Well, quote, it won't do to have Princeton behind any other town in any respect. You know, we're going to have the best general store. We're going to have the most favorable economic climate. We're going to have the best baseball club. It's all part of a package. So this competition initially begins as what we might call civic competition. We see also an example of Jerseyville and Carrollton. Jerseyville and Carrollton are two little towns down in southwestern Illinois. Jerseyville, obviously, in Jersey County, Carrollton in Greene County. They had a real rivalry. Carrollton had a better baseball team that was constantly being challenged by Jerseyville. And at one point, after Carrollton had defeated Jerseyville for the third time, the Carrollton Gazette wrote, "It is hardly probable that a club from a village like Jerseyville would be able to play with that of a city like Carrollton without getting used up." So the newspapers use this as another tool against their rivals. Dixon versus Sterling up in northwestern Illinois. The Dixon paper was engaged in a rivalry. The club and two baseball clubs were engaged in a rivalry in those two towns. And finally, the Dixon paper got fed up and wrote, "You fellows are getting mighty anxious to get cleaned out. Come see us when you boil over, and we'll try to exercise you a little on a 10-acre lot." So these are just a few examples. This is constantly going on from Rockford to Cairo, this sort of bannering in the newspapers. So this competition then is going to be enhanced, aggravated by the field when you mix up something like athletic competition, community pride, and of course the elephant in the room, gambling. Gambling was rampant, and it caused all sorts of problems. You know, imagine somebody coming today to a Muffins Ground Squirrels game and standing on the sidelines and making bets as the game went on. That's what's going on then. This is not professional baseball. This is obviously amateur baseball, but because of these other factors, it becomes much more serious. This, by the way, is a shot of Fairview Park. Indicator was at the State Fairgrounds. This is 1860, circa 1867. If you thought the old Methodist campground where the Chicago Salmon used to play, or Grinder Field in Hobart, Indiana, are difficult fields, this is what they played on. They played right amid those trees. The grandstand, you can see at the very back. This is the site of the great tournament of the Western States, held there in 1867. Gambling is not so much an issue here, but this is one of the first places that we see the dissatisfaction start to emerge, and games become not these rituals of fellowship and friendship and friendly athletic competition, but of hard rivalries and dissatisfaction and people trying to sneak under the rules, use ineligible players. Among them was this guy, Lee Cheney of the Bloomington Baseball Club. And again, I'm going to avoid going down another rabbit hole here. I got a lot of stuff on this guy. He is quite a character and lived a long, full, colorful, shall we say, life. His sin, if you will, was he's a very good ball player. And he played for the Bloomington Baseball Club's senior club, but was also on the roster of the junior club, which those of you, I know Gary's looked at this because he gave me the rule book. If you looked at those 1867 rules, that is strictly a no-no. A player, you cannot be on the roster of both clubs at the same time for obvious reasons. And if Cheney is good enough to play for the senior club, and he was, well, doesn't that give the junior club unfair advantage? And so when the Bloomington Junior Club goes on the field at this tournament in Decatur to play Springfield, I think it was the Liberty Club, the Springfield Club says, well, wait a minute, Cheney doesn't belong on this roster. He's a senior player. Springfield walks off the field. Who's to play? Well, they've got people that paid money to watch these games at the fairgrounds. And so Pana, a little town south of Decatur, is there. And they said, well, we'll step onto the field. And they played. And that worked out great until the Bloomington Club decided they didn't like the umpire. And so they stomp off the field. The Bloomington Junior Club leaves without playing. That simply is following the president of the Bloomington Senior Club, which had already left town, because when they arrived, their great rival was the Chicago Excelsior Club. sort of a precursor to what becomes the White Stockings, not in terms of personnel, but in terms of the idea of Chicago having a dominant club. Those two clubs have been dickering back and forth, had played, never actually played each other, but they. Well, you think Bloomington comes to Decatur as this long-awaited match. They're going to be the two best teams in that tournament, without a doubt. So Bloomington has been trying to get Chicago to play them for months. Here's their chance. Bloomington gets off the train and starts lobbying the other clubs to rule the Chicago Excelsior Club ineligible because they're not going to get there before 4 p.m. on the day before the games. The other clubs refuse to go along with Bloomington. So Bloomington says that this is the senior club. Well, the hell with this. And they get on the train and go back to Bloomington. So within 24 hours of the first series of matches, you've got all this controversy, which leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. This rivalry is affected by gambling. This is a great rivalry between Centralia, which is down in southwestern Illinois, and just a few miles to the east is Mount Vernon. And those in 1868, they had a 3-game series. Centralia won at Centralia. The Mount Vernon won at Mount Vernon. So the rubber match is going to be played in a little place called Ashland, which if you look real hard on a map today, you can find between Mount Vernon and Centralia. And this was by the way, this is James Cunningham. This is the only single picture I know of, aside from people on the Rockford Club, of a baseball player in Illinois. Here, you might enjoy the uniform. Look at the size of that bat. He's carrying. He is in his hand. You can't see it. Maybe you can. All I can see is your smiling faces, and most of you are still awake, so I like that. Is covering his left hand. In that, he's holding this silver ball, which Centralia won in that same Decatur tournament in 1867. I'm not sure what the chain is around his neck. This is the only copy we have, and it's terrible quality, as you can see. Anyway, this game, both Mount Vernon and Centralia charter rail cars, and they bring fans, and in the words of a Centralia player later on, the roughest guys from town we can find, because we think there's going to be a fight. We've heard that Mount Vernon is loading up the train with its tough guys, so we're going to have our tough guys there. Very thrilling. There was a lot of gambling going on during the game, and at the end of the game, Centralia pulls out a last inning victory. Great celebration, except the conflict now spills over into the sidelines, and there was sort of a mini riot. There was fist fights. Somebody pulled a gun. It's all sort of lost to history, the details of who. Apparently nobody was shot, or if they did, they covered it up. But again, we have this, what's supposed to be a sport to build community, right? This game to celebrate our shared rituals, and it evolves into a near riot in southwestern Illinois. Even the next year, in 1869, 2 junior clubs. This spreads into the juniors now. The Occidental, that's a team in Quincy, the Occidental Baseball Club Junior Club and Springfield Liberty Club played in Quincy for what they termed the state junior championship. Well, this is a joke because there's no structure. You become a junior champion by saying you're the junior champion. I mean, there was probably any team in Chicago could have cleaned these guys' clocks with no trouble at all, but who cares? Anyway, this turns into a big brouhaha during the game, partly because of gambling, and the umpire, G.W. Lackey, who is a big deal. He's one of the founders of the Bloomington Baseball Club. He's the president of the Illinois State Baseball Association. He's a very well-respected guy. He's the umpire, and the crowd just never lets up on him. And so at the end of the game, what was common in those days is that the umpire would make a speech too at the end of the game. And Lackey uses his speech to address the crowd and basically say, this is the worst I've ever been treated. I've never umpired a game. He umpired games all over Illinois where a crowd has questioned my decision. So the spirit, the atmosphere had changed. Also, the edit, as we saw with the Cincinnati story, the editors start to get on these teams when their teams lose. The senior club in Quincy, the Occidentals, they were so bad that the editors there referred to them as the Quincy Accidentals. In Chicago Excelsior, that's a great story. If you get a chance, look at that book by Peter Morris, Baseball Pioneers. I'm looking at it over here. Yeah, Baseball Pioneers, and you can read the story of the Excelsiors, the most successful team and the most hated team. They won like one game, but they lost one game, but the one game they lost ruined them forever. One of the Chicago papers printed an ad, a fake ad, wanted immediately at the offices of the Tribune and the Republican newspapers, a baseball club that the Excelsiors can beat, and that will agree not to win or carry off any Chicago money. So, and you're going to see the countless other examples of this around the state. The clincher sort of comes in 1868 when a bunch of these top Eastern clubs, like the Morrisania Unions, the Brooklyn Athletics, the Philadelphia Athletics, the Cincinnati Buckeyes, start touring the state and just, as you would imagine, beating the socks off even the best of the downstate teams, not to mention the poor old Excelsiors who are on their deathbed by this point. The clincher, which I talk about in the beginning of my book, is sort of the launching point. I jumped it off there, excuse me. Is the Cincinnati Red Stockings we just heard about. They swing through Quincy on their way back from the West Coast in 1869 and defeat the Occidental Senior Club, which has sort of come out of retirement, 51-7. By that point, it's clear, a number of things are clear. You got to have professionals if you're going to really be a top-notch team, and the only places that can do that are Rockford and Chicago. Number two, practice. You can practice 24 hours a day, and it's not going to make any difference if you don't have athletic talent. Therefore, why should these adult guys keep trying to play? So you start to see by 1869, the junior game emerges as more dominant or more talked about, but the coverage is really, really diminished. So essentially, little box scores or a line or two saying somebody won. What's setting in now is this disillusionment, the collapse. After 1868, you'll have a couple of adult clubs still operating, but the attention is gone, and they're still playing baseball. They're playing baseball on pickup games. They're not organizing into a club, spending money. They're just playing for pleasure that they play. And it becomes more of an athletic contest. The old rituals and customs fall away. In Rock Island, the newspaper writes, baseball fanaticism is perceptibly on the decline. The men who but one short year ago were proud to carry a broken finger or a frowning eye from the hotly contested field now don't seem to care whether they get into a ball field at all. Cairo, which was a hotbed of baseball earlier, wrote, the mania has passed away, vanished like a summer cloud. In Decatur, the Decatur Magnet editor wrote, baseball is being killed by the growing custom of employing professionals to do the hard work and play the matches. And so after 1868, the organized adult clubs, save for those two leading teams, the four cities in Rockford and the evolving Excelsiors, are going to eventually be replaced by the White Stockings. The others disappeared. Decatur, Springfield, Quincy, Bloomington, what have you, they're gone. They disband. The guys go on to other things. The organized game increasingly becomes a game for junior teams Unorganized play continues, likely for adults and youngsters, but is not noticed in the newspaper. And the newspaper articles, the coverage is reduced to simple results or early box scores. So I tried to rush through as fast as I could. If you have any questions, and this is again part of a much larger project where I just sort of pulled out this little section here. This ball is from that a tournament in Rockford in 1866. It's the only, perhaps the only known survivor of one of these gilded balls. It's silver, and it's in the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum in Springfield, Illinois, which is where I found it. There's also controversy over this tournament, because this is a place where Chicago Excelsiors got mad in 1865 and walked off the field rather than play the Rock Island team for the championship. So I will get off of there. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Bob, this Corky, in your research, when baseball started up in Illinois, did they have similar factions pushing back, if you will, that it's the devil's game, blah, 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 and it's going to be bad for us? Or was it mostly widely accepted as we need this kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is it was widely accepted. The interesting caveat would be there were a couple of dissenters. For some reason, the editors in Belleville didn't like it at all and complained about it and basically told people to stop sending them scores. But around the state, it was seen, it was greeted in part because this is a way to show that your town is with it. You know, you're up to date. You know, what's that song from the Music Man? What's up to date in the Kansas City? It's not from the Oklahoma. You know, the Kansas City song. It's sort of the idea. Okay, we're up to date. We got a baseball club. You know, we're on the cutting edge. But they loved it. I mean, those first couple of years, it just really shocking how they just embraced this game and had a lot of fun with it. Very interesting stories, a lot of humor. So I hope that answers.
Oh, Bob, you might want to explain why the Centralia team was called the Egyptians. I know the reason why, but people outside Illinois might not. They were not devotees of King Tut.
Yeah, they were not. Yeah, they were not to that. That part of Southern Illinois and where it begins and ends is sort of the matter of debate. But basically, we'll say south of Interstate 70 or 65 was referred to as Egypt. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole we won't go down, but that's a typical thing. Also, to make it even worse, there were 3 Egyptians. There was an Egyptian club in Cairo, Egyptian club in Centralia, and there was an Egyptian club, I think, in Carbondale for a while. And of course, they all fought about who was the real Egyptians. In the Lincoln-Douglas debates, you'll find Douglas threatening, I'm gonna trot Lincoln down to Egypt, which is that debate at Jonesboro, and make him say whether he's against or for slavery or that sort of thing. The idea, because that was a heavily Southern area at the time, so that was considered to be those were basically people from the South had settled in. So it goes way back.
Oh, Bob, I guess another question. By the way, Egypt, it was parallel with the flooding of the Nile River in Egypt. Yeah. That's why for people. But you know, we know that Southern Illinois was basically settled by people from the South, and Northern Illinois by people from the North. From your research, did you see any difference in baseball enthusiasm between the northern settled Northern Illinois and the southern settled southern part?
Not really. It seemed like sort of they would compare it to the cholera. It's like this disease that is spreading, but in a positive sense. Like there's articles, this is just like a fever. It was pretty uniform, except for these spots. And I'm not sure, Western Illinois, Southeastern Illinois, we don't have the newspapers extant. And if you weren't close enough, if you didn't play a club that had a newspaper that survived, chances are you weren't going to be mentioned. My guess is that the game is going on in those areas as well. We just don't know about it because they didn't play people whose newspapers have survived. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate your attention, and hopefully, if you have any questions, you can always contact me. And this is the Cliff Notes version, the reduced Cliff Notes version that you got of a larger project, and I'll be happy in the future, hopefully, that you can see that between covers and